Hi, Judith. Thanks so much for coming along to answer these additional questions. There's quite a few to get through, so we'll crack on.
Okay.
We always try to communicate with our 8-year-old with ADHD, but often he's so engaged with what he's doing, which we need him to stop immediately. We can only shout. Any other realistic solutions?
Yeah, I mean, this is a common one when it comes to children, not just with ADHD, but generally any child who is engaged, engrossed in something that they are really kind of enjoying. And that's about, our chemicals in our brain. So our chemicals in our brain that might make us do things that we like, really give us hyper focus. With a child with ADHD, I would say that, something to consider is that when they're doing something that they're engrossed in, there's actually a hyper focus. So it's harder to stop something immediately when you're hyper focused. So kids with ADHD, but generally I would say this for all children, do need what we call transition warnings, or lead time between, having to stop this activity and then move on to something else. So to transition to something else might need a bit of, prompting and warning. So for a neurotypical child, I would say you need at least one warning of saying, okay, you've got 5 minutes left of whatever you're doing, and then this is going to happen. Yeah. And then you make sure that child understands what you're saying. With ADHD child, even more so, you probably need to do more than one transition warning, maybe a 10-minute warning, followed by a 5-minute warning, followed by even a 3-minute warning to help transition from that thing that they're involved in. And you also have to really be clear that the child understands what you've said, because some children with ADHD, if you're talking to them and they're not really looking at you, you've not got their eye contact, or even haven't even got their attention, they're not really taken in the instruction or what you've said. So shouting is generally not great in terms of our commands given as parents, because when we shout, children tend to, over time, learn to tune out from shouting, and then we have to shout louder. So what's probably best is to come closer to children, lower your voice, and give this transition warning, and then you would come back after that few minutes or whatever it is you've said. For other ADHD kids, another thing to think about is possible use of timers. So if you need them to really transition from something, maybe you give them a timer that buzzes after a certain time that says, okay, I've only got 2 minutes left in this thing. But generally speaking, those are the ways that you would encourage a child who's engrossed in something from moving on to the next thing.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I love the timer idea, actually. How does a parent kickstart assessment for their child suspected to be neurodiverse?
Yeah, so there's a few ways that this can be done. If it's a child that you have spoken to the school about previously, maybe you could just go through the school, speak to the Senko, speak to anybody who's kind of in pastoral support that might know that child and already be aware of their needs. And then the school can help you kickstart that assessment, because they can kind of make those referrals onto either specialist services or hospital, or wherever that assessment process is located. They will be able to do that. So schools can do that. Also, the school nurse in some areas, not in every area, it depends on your area, but in some areas, a school nurse helps kickstart assessments for children who are neurodiverse. Again, through liaising with the school and observations of the child and knowing the child, etc. And then the last way I would suggest is you speak to your GP. So for kids who, you suspect attention deficit difficulties, or even social communication difficulties, you can talk to your GP, and they can be a source of information for that assessment, referral, etc.
Thank you. My son puts on a squeaky voice, which I find difficult to understand as the words become exaggerated. Any advice?
Yeah, I've experienced this one myself. Very common for kids to, adopt a certain way of communication that they find quite enjoyable, or funny, or maybe it's even sensory for some kids. But I would say if you're really trying to get the child to adopt a more kind of either understandable tone, calmer tone, whatever it is you're trying to achieve, you've got to look for the positive opposites of this. So what tends to happen is if this child uses a squeaky voice and you give a lot of feedback around that squeaky voice, then they probably will use it more often. What you've got to look is for the moments when children are actually communicating in the voice that you want them to, and then you would say, oh, wow, I love that voice that you're using right now, and really draw attention to that way that they're communicating with you. Lots of attention around that makes them communicate more around that way. The other thing to consider is if the squeaky voice was to continue, is when to decide, okay, I'm going to withdraw some attention from this, but you let children know. So you say, okay, so when you speak in that squeaky voice and I can't understand you, I'm not going to talk to you until you use your voice that I can understand. So you let children have a real clear idea about that. And then you would selectively ignore that particular behavior until they change. And then as soon as they change, you give them your attention back and you notice and you say, wow, I love that voice you're using now. I really can understand what you're saying. So this tends to happen with any kind of behaviors we want to change, is looking for the positive opposites, really reinforcing those positive opposites. And then the opposite, the behavior that we don't want to see, is deciding when to selectively ignore that, but letting children know about that as well, being really clear with them. All right.
Great. Yeah, such good advice. Hard sometimes in that situation, I think.
Yeah.
Do you offer counselling, as I don't know how to manage the behaviour and everything you say I'm doing wrong?
Yeah, I do offer counselling. What I would say to you as well is that not everything you're doing is wrong. I mean, we tend to feel like that as parents, but I would say that we can over exaggerate even what we're doing and feel like we're doing the worst job. You're probably doing a lot of things right. I do offer counselling to both adults and to children, to talk about how we manage ourselves and manage children's behaviour. A lot of this is about how we, as parents, because I'm a parent as well, how we kind of manage our own internal self-talk around what our children do as well. Because if we give ourselves maybe a negative narrative about what's happening, rather than one that says, actually, some of this is developmentally normal for my child to test or to push or to even cause me to feel frustrated at times. Sometimes if we don't have a very helpful narrative in our own mind, it makes our responses worse in the moment. But what I would say as well is that making wrong responses to children in moments never does them, major damage, in those one-off moments. What tends to be the case is when we do long years of patterns of behavior of responding negatively is more of a difficulty for children, rather than when we have the one-off times where we respond negatively. So I would say it's all about reflection. If you do want counselling or any kind of support from me, you can get my details from Brilliant Parents.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Can ADHD be masked, for example, in school, in the same way that ASD can?
Yeah, I mean, this one's a bit more of a difficult one. I would say that that's probably not as easy for the ADHD presentation as it is for the ADD presentation. So an ADHD child is not able to push down those impulses in the same way to say, I'm going to kind of keep this under kind of control throughout the school day and then let all my ADHD symptoms out at the end of the day. That's not how ADHD tends to work, because kids who are hyperactive and have those really strong impulses to do things will just be impulsive. And they're the kids who get in trouble a lot at school. So it tends to not be those children who, because ASC is different, you see, where ASC, the child is in many times anxiety and almost perception of how people perceive them is big in their mind. So they adjust themselves in that environment and hold in a lot of that stuff for the day, and then let out, breathe a sigh of relief when they come out of the school gate. ADHD kids tend not to do that. ADD might be able to be, I wouldn't say masked, it's just not seen as easily for some children, because the child's distractible and maybe daydreams a bit and maybe doesn't focus on the work, but because they don't tend to cause as much issues within school, teachers and staff and whoever won't really notice that they're causing any issues. So it's not a big deal. So it doesn't make any kind of note to anybody to say, oh, this child's struggling or whatever. So I would say masking ADHD is something I've never really heard of. I've heard of ASC mostly, but ADHD symptoms, true ADHD symptoms, definitely are not easily masked. If that child is masking ADHD kind of presentations within school, then I would be questioning whether it is ADHD or whether something else is causing those symptoms at other times, if that makes sense. Because ADHD symptoms can be presented from other things, even from a child feeling any kind of distress internally can display some ADHD type symptoms, forgetfulness, distractibility, etc. But true ADHD presentation tends not to be masked in school. And that's probably the last thing to say actually about that is that it's one of the reasons why, in terms of diagnosis of ADHD and assessment, I think I went through it on the slides, is that part of that is, an observation within school, and gathering school reports around what that child does, because it has to be, in terms of the actual diagnosis, it has to be seen in two environments, not in one. And that's why if it is only seen in one environment, that child would not typically get a diagnosis of ADHD, because that child's not displaying that within at least two different environments, home and school. It usually has to be seen.
Okay, thank you. What is the school's role in referral for assessment for neurodiagnosis? For diagnosis of start that question again. I think my connection went funny. What is the school's role in referral for assessment for diagnosis of neurodiversity?
Yeah, so I think, like I mentioned the last couple of questions ago, there is a school role in terms of either Senko or any of the kind of pastoral team that work with these children from a point of view of special educational needs, and have that more idea of what children's struggles are within the classroom, etc. They have a role in terms of referring into either children's specialist services that do assessments for children who are neurodiverse, or even to places like CAMS or any other kind of organization that does those assessments. So school does play a role, but also if that referral has not come from the school, and has it come from, say, the parent and via the GP, etc., the school have a role in terms of providing the information that is needed for those assessments. So they have to fill out, whether it's the SDQ scores, or they have to fill out the kind of in-school reports, and also they'll probably help for that child to be observed within school as part of the assessment. So they do have a role in terms of providing information for that overall picture that is being gathered by the clinicians.
Okay, if children have ASC, are they drawn to other children who have ASC in play?
That's not in my experience. No, I've never really said that's in my experience that's what happens. It may occur from time to time for some children, but in generally, when it comes to ASC, kids with social communication difficulties find it difficult to interact with anyone. So they tend not to be feeling very confident in terms of engaging in play experiences with other children generally anyway. I've heard of maybe older children, teenagers who have ASC, feeling a bit more comfortable around other kids who've got social communication difficulties themselves, but not younger children. Younger children tend to be a bit more in their own world. They're not really kind of that bothered around social interactions, social relationships. They might be a bit difficult to make friends, or may not follow what other people are doing, kind of have their own kind of idea about what play should be about, or maybe they try to direct other kids in play and tell them what they think they should do. I wouldn't say they exclusively just kind of almost gravitate towards other kids who have got social communication difficulties. No, I've not seen that in my experience.
Great. What if a child shows some aspects of autism outside the family, like they're more withdrawn at school, with friends, they don't understand social cues, but with family, they're not showing these traits?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is that when we talk about traits, we are all on that autism spectrum, every single one of us, and we might manifest some of those kind of traits in different environments based on how we feel internally, but also on our own personality. So some kids who find social interactions difficult anyway may not be, kind of autism, diagnosed children, but they will have those traits because actual social communication and social interactions are still things that they find anxiety provoking, or they don't really understand that well, or don't really get on that well with. But when they are comfortable with people, then those things don't, they don't cause them stress or anxiety. And so it will be very different with people that they are close to, because they don't have to kind of think about those things as much. It just comes naturally with your family or friends, but those things are things that you have to think about when you're in another social context. So there are kids who are socially anxious who are not ASC. That happens a lot. There's lots of children out there that are not really comfortable in social environments and find it, conversations difficult, and making friends, knowing what to say to people difficult, etc. And the social world is not easy for children generally anyway. You know, it takes quite sophisticated skills to do that. So there might be reasons why they're withdrawn outside of that family context, and that might be about experience of discomfort when they've been in those social situations, which then make them withdraw even more. And there's kids who are, you know, almost feel less confident. So it could just be a confidence thing sometimes in those social situations where I don't feel the confidence, so I say less. I don't know what to say. Do you know what I mean? And it becomes a bit like that, and it can be quite difficult. Again, with family and friends, I don't have to think like that. Do you know, it's very easy. I'm myself. I don't have to kind of worry about what others are thinking about me in the same way. So that could be some of those reasons why that happens. But like I said, there's many children and adults actually experience that, and they're not autistic, but they have those kind of, what you said, traits.
Yeah. Great. A great question, great answer. We're getting through these. How can we support parents that have an autistic child that is non-verbal and struggles to stay in control of the child's behaviour?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult.
So I imagine that's coming from a support worker of some kind, maybe a teacher or in social.
Yeah, it's really difficult for parents when they've got a non-verbal child, and obviously that child's got behaviours which they might find challenging, etc. I think for me, you know, a lot of that starts with psychoeducation for parents, really understanding a bit more about autism and understanding what that means for the child and the child's world. That's why that book I mentioned in the webinar by Tony Atwood is a good one, just to give parents some basic understanding of what it's like for this child. But there are lots of good books out there. I mean, there's another lady called Teresa Jolliffe who writes a lot about experiences from an ASC kind of perspective. I think some of that psychoeducation is really important for parents to understand that, and then to know what the kind of tools that would be really helpful for them to understand what that child's behavior is communicating. Because I mean, all behavior is communication, you know, whether a child is neurotypical or neurodiverse, all behavior is communication. With children who are on the ASC kind of spectrum, even more so, you need to be able to work out what that child's behavior is communicating to you. Because is it something that is about them needing something tangible and they can't tell you that in words? Is that something about them wanting to escape from a situation which they find overwhelming? And again, they can't tell you that in words. Is it something about the environments from a sensory perspective where it's just overwhelming sensory wise, light, sound, touch, feel, taste, whatever it is, and they just can't tell you that? We've got to work those things out for children who are non-verbal. That will give you the idea about what then helps them to manage in those situations. And then, you know, the other thing is to help that child who's non-verbal to get a communication system for the world around them, because it's not easy for them either. They need to be able to, you know, signal when something is needed. And they also need to be able to know what's going to happen as well, and be able to show that they know what's going to happen. So that's why communication systems which are visual, now and next cards, I think I showed some of them in the webinar, those kinds of things that are systems that are used for children who are non-verbal are really useful. And books like Social Stories, again, which I've mentioned, are really good for kids who need a visual representation of what's actually happening, because that reduces anxiety and gives them a bit more of a clarity about what the world is about around them. Because, you know, for that child, it's very anxiety provoking, all of that. But for the parent, it starts for me with psychoeducation about what's happening for that child, and then the tools that they need to help, you know, daily life be manageable, things that happen with their child in day to day to become more manageable. I think once you do have an understanding of what happens for children who are non-verbal and have more challenging or extreme behaviors, I think it does reduce your level of feeling overwhelmed as a parent, because you start to understand that some of that is just about them trying to communicate something to you and they don't know how to communicate it to you. So it becomes less triggering, less personal, etc. If you can understand it. So I think that's a big part of this.
Great. And we will include all the resources are included in this video. Thank you, Judo. It's becoming increasingly hard to prepare school lunch for my son. He doesn't like school lunch. I'm not sure what to do.
Well, that's a very common one for many parents. I mean, there's not a specific answer. I think it's one of those things that you have to approach with your son, because I think it would start with finding out what is the issue with the school lunches. Is it something that, you know, about what's being made for the school lunch? Is it another issue? Is it something else about when he's there? Because some kids don't even want to eat when they go to school for whatever reason. You know, they don't like sitting down where they're sitting, or, you know, whoever, you know, whatever happens at lunchtime. Sometimes those things are kind of like the triggers. So you have to almost find out what is the root issue around that. But then also the other part about it is helping children to take a bit more responsibility in these areas. I don't know how old your son is, but if he's old enough to kind of be a part of conversation about what would be something he would eat for lunch, then you have that conversation. Maybe you've done that already, but also the preparation of these things. So help to make the sandwiches, help to pack lunchbox. I think the more kids are involved in those things, that helps. But if there's another trigger, which is beyond just the food that's in the box, then that's the bit to try and work out is what the other trigger is that might be causing him not to want to have the school lunch.
I guess that means in the setting that he's eating his lunch in, is it those kind of questions? What's happening? Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
And when it started, so, you know, when did you notice this kind of issue start to occur? And then, you know, what's the kind of circumstances around that? Because if you can be a bit more of a detective around some of that, it might highlight for you some change, some difficulty, something that is not being kind of obviously seen, which might have triggered the reduction in wanting to eat my school lunch now. Sometimes kids don't talk about these things from many perspectives, but we need to find out what that really is. Maybe even talking to the school as well might be useful.
Thank you. How do I encourage my child to read? He hates books in a way I don't understand.
Yeah, another difficult one for all parents. It's hard to give an exact answer because each child's different, but you've got to find a way that is going to motivate children around books and stories. So some children, you know, like to be read to, and maybe it starts there. So some kids who don't want to read, first of all, need to be read to. And get you kind of almost spark that love of stories through reading to them, because then they start to love the kind of experience of a story being read. And I think I mean, you may do this already, but sometimes when kids can almost get into the story with you because you've brought it to life through your voices and through the kind of theatrics around it, that helps to make books accessible to children. And again, it depends on the types of books kids are reading as well. So another thing that might get children into books is what types of books they want to read. We give children books expecting them to read whatever we give them, but what are they actually interested in? If you find the thing that they actually love and are interested in, then you'll find that actually they do want to read a bit more of those things. But I do think it's about a combination of both you reading and them reading. And some children, you might need to do some of that with at first, where you say, okay, I'm going to read a page to you, then you read a page to me. You know, it's that kind of inclusive kind of way of doing it. But sparking their imagination is a big part of reading, I would suggest. For younger children, I think that even includes things like, puppets and games and things like that. Songs. I mean, that's why they do that at things like nurseries. The reason why they do like nursery rhymes and nursery songs and use puppets is because it's all to capture children's imagination. It's all to bring these things to life and make them love a story. So I want to read that story over and over again. Then, you know, you've captured that child's imagination. You know, I want to hear the Three Little Pigs again. That's the stuff that you really want to do, is try and capture their imagination in that way. And then it will become easier for them to want to get into reading themselves.
And I was just going to add, I think, because with teenagers, it gets naturally quite hard anyway. There's a sort of a drop off, isn't there?
There is for older kids.
Any advice for teenagers? For
the older ones, again, it's a thing of thinking about what are their interests. So like my older son, he's 14, he may not want to read some history book that we put in front of him, but he will read a book which is about Lego animation. And or he'll read a comic, and actually reading the comic or reading the book about Lego animation is still reading. So it's just changing it to the things that they then again are interested in and love. But I think you have to almost create a way of living where that becomes the norm, where everybody's kind of engaged in reading in the household as well. So, you know, you read magazines and papers, and children just get a load of different range of different things to read. And it doesn't become that we only just read books. We read different things. And for older children, that gives them a bit more access to that.
Brilliant. I mean, even online they're reading, aren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. My son hates motorways. How can he protect his ears from the tyre noise?
Okay, so that sounds like a bit of a sensory reaction that your son has to that. So again, think about how you reduce that sensory overload for him. Some parents use ear defenders for children, things like that help them. Other parents would maybe give them their favorite music in headphones to listen to. Whatever it is you think, and you might have to be trial and error really to find out what it is that you can help reduce the kind of overstimulation, because it sounds like it's overstimulation when he's on the motorway with you. Anything that you can think of to do that, I would say. It's difficult when it comes to sensory, sensory things where children are triggered by them, because, in the long run, my thing is always to say it'd be great for that child to be able to learn over time how to manage that, because it's not something that's ever going to go away. And I had that with my older son where it came to hand dryers with toilets and stuff like that. But with these things, if you want to kind of give them a chance to learn how to do it over time, it's gradual exposure to it. So the problem with the motorway is that you're on there for a very long time, whereas with gradual exposure, you tend to like expose the child to a thing for a little while, and then they stop, and then you can then say to them, oh look, you was able to cope with that. Yeah. But I'd say initially you probably would need to reduce all that sound down by something like ear defenders, headphones, things like that would reduce it in the initial stage, I would say. But long term, I would want to think about, if I was you in your situation, I would want to think about a way of helping him manage gradually over time. You know what I mean? And build up almost an ability to cope with it. Because like I said, my oldest son now is 14, still doesn't like men's hand dryers, but he can tolerate them. And that's the thing, is when he was 4, he couldn't tolerate them. So it's thinking about, okay, what do I really want to work towards over time?
Thank you. Rewarding my child is obsessed with, reread that one. And I'm remembering when this one came in actually, and it was when you were talking about rewarding during the webinar. Right. This question came in, so it was focusing on rewarding. My child is obsessed with reward, and it becomes like a drug. It's getting so expensive.
Yeah, very common pitfall that people experience when it comes to giving rewards. Now, here's the thing to think about with this. I think I might have mentioned this in the webinar, is that sometimes when it comes to rewarding children, motivation systems, they have to start with things which kids still find motivational, but they're not high cost things. Because when you set up a system where children get high cost rewards from it, it becomes, that is the bar you've set. So if the child says, oh, for this week of doing whatever you've asked, I'd like an Xbox game, then when you give him that Xbox game, the week after, it's going to be very difficult to drop down from an Xbox game. That's the problem with setting up high cost rewards. So I would always encourage parents, and myself included, to use low cost or no cost reward systems, things that children can earn, which are very small kind of incentives along the way towards whatever you're asking them to do. But then also the other idea about this is it's not supposed to be forever. So this reward system, and you let children know that we're going to do this for a while, but it's not forever. It's about creating habits. You're trying to create a new habit, and once the habit is established, you would be phasing out the reward for that thing and just praising that child for the thing that they're doing. So you replace what we call, tangible, say, rewards with social rewards. And the social reward is a praise and a hug and a high five and nice one. It's something to think about, but they do take planning. that's why I say with reward system, it takes planning, and a lot of times they go wrong because we've not been able to plan them properly. But I would say, because you're in that situation already, try to almost, I don't know, do a bit of a reset around your system and decide with your child, you know, what low cost or no cost rewards they can earn. You can even do a menu. Okay, so that keeps the cost down as well, where you say, okay, points wise, you're going to earn a certain amount of points from doing this, whatever we're working on for the week. And, you know, this amount of points would be this amount of points would be that. And you can negotiate those things, but still, even the negotiation would be the highest thing on that list of menu, on that menu, would be something that you know you can afford and you can sustain, because otherwise it will become out of control for you. So, I mean, for me, a reward system would never go beyond £5 maximum, you know, for that reward for that week or whatever it is. I would never go beyond the £5. The cost of that would be more than £5. And then, you know, that system saying, okay, so what are the things below £5 that we can get that you would want, and you could talk to children about that, get them to be, you know, part of that decision making. But there are lots of lower cost things that are still motivating. I mean, even I mentioned comics earlier on. You know, a comic is not majorly expensive, but there's young people out there that want a comic. Do you know what I mean? Or they want a certain thing from Tesco's when you go there, you know, something that they usually collect or something like that. That's fine. And if it doesn't go beyond a certain price, but if you set them up high, like I said, that's when it becomes majorly expensive. And if you keep them going for too long, that's also when it becomes majorly expensive. They need to be phased out. No more than about a month doing a reward system, I would recommend. And I would even say a month might even be too long.
Oh, can I get some clarification on that? So when you're saying a month is too long for a reward, you mean, so when you're planning ahead, just plan for a month?
Maximum, yeah. Because if you're working on like if I'm working on, I don't know, my child going to bed on time, you know, if I see by week 2, they're going to bed on time, I don't need to continue that for another 2 weeks. You know, by the 3rd week, I'm looking to phase that out now. So phasing out is a process of, rather than them getting the thing every day, it goes to every 2nd day or every 3rd day. Do you see what I mean? And it phases out. So rather you getting the points every day now, you only get points every other day, or you get only points every 3rd day. And then after a while, it's phased out completely where you're not getting points anymore. And now I'm just praising you. Do you see what I mean? So you still, by week 3, want to be phasing that thing out once you're seeing that child is consistently doing that particular behavior. If a child is not doing a particular behavior by week 3, I would suggest that behavior is not the right level. It's not been pitched at the right level for them. So, you know, maybe it was too much to expect them to go to bed every single day on time. That was too high, the bar, and I needed to set it a bit lower, and then work my way up, if that makes sense. So I might have started off saying, you know, the goal is for you to get to your bed 2 times this week on time. Yeah. So that might have been my starting point, because that's more realistic than saying every single day this week. That's what usually happens when reward systems are failing. It's usually that the target behavior has been pitched at the wrong level, or that's not the right target behavior to even start with, because some children need you to start with something that is already something they do, not something I've never done in my life. So if I've never put laundry in the basket, you've never ever seen me do that in my life, but then you set that up as a system, don't be surprised when you see nothing coming, you know, in terms of points, because actually that's not on my radar. Whereas start with something I do regularly. Start with, I make the bed every day, or make the bed every other day at least. You know I do that, so start with that. That motivates me, and do that for a week, and then you say, okay, Judah, well done. You're a star. You've done that so well. We're going to move on to something a little bit tougher for you. That tends to be a bit more motivating for children.
Great. Okay. My son has autism and suffers from anxiety and constant worry. Is it possible for a child to also have ADHD as well?
The short answer is yes, 100%. What clinicians will call comorbidity. So basically the symptoms of ADHD running alongside with ASD. And that's where it can be quite difficult, because some of those things overlap. Sometimes you have more of your ASD traits being shown than the ADHD traits, and vice versa. So it is absolutely possible. And I think the stats say it could be up to 60% of those that have ADHD or ASD have ADHD symptoms as well. on both sides. You know, it's about 60% that there's comorbidity, and not just with those conditions either. So there's high comorbidity with ASC, ADHD, and other things like dyslexia or dyscalculia, or other kind of conditions, tic disorders, etc. There's higher levels of comorbidity with other conditions as well.
And in that case, is it something they would just approach their doctor with again, or whoever they're seeing about already?
Yeah. So when they go for the assessment for these, whoever they went with assessments for, go back through that process around assessing if they feel that the child has got ADHD as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What % of children who have ASC also get diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah, so that's what I just kind of said, which is, it's about, from what I remember, it's about 60 to 70% of those with ASC can also be comorbid with ADHD as well.
Yeah, okay. Can prematurity, in this case, like 13 weeks prematurity, be a cause for ADHD and ASD?
Now, with this, what they found with some of the kind of research is that in some cases they found that low birth weight was associated in both situations, ADHD and ASC, but I don't think there's any conclusive evidence that says prematurity is a causal factor for either. When it comes to ADHD, about the brain chemistry anyway, there's less kind of thoughts around birth difficulties when it comes to ADHD. I think it's more around ASC as far as I remember. They've done some research though, but no, I wouldn't say it's like a definite thing, but there are some research studies that say there was some links to it. So that's as kind of as much as I can kind of say in terms of clarity around that. It's not 100% clear, basically.
Thank you. We've had that question.
Mm-hmm.
How old does a child have to be to take medication for ADHD or ASD?
Well, there's no medication for ASD, so we don't medicate children with ASD. For children with ADHD, they have to be 6 and above. So that's why the diagnosis doesn't tend to happen for children until 6, because they wouldn't want to give medication to a child under 6 years old.
Thank you. Is there support for parents with teens not yet diagnosed? Not that I know of, but like some of the websites that I gave you on the webinar, I would have a look at some of those websites. When you say not diagnosed, I don't know which one neurodiversity you're talking about, but for the ADHD ones, for example, websites like ADIS and another one I put on there. I can't remember the names of the other ones now, but there's a few I gave, and they do have support for parents with teens and younger children. So have a look on some of those websites, I'd say. There'll be links in the video for this at the end as well. I know that there is one in Harrow, which is open to Hillingdon Parents, which we will share. I think it's the Centre for ASD and ADHD. Okay, thank you. My son is 16 and I've noticed some points highlighted today. What do I do to get him assessed so coping mechanisms and skills can be put in place before he becomes an adult? Yeah, so that definitely starts with a conversation with your GP. Talk to the GP about him and assessment, the process for assessment. They'll probably refer him to your local, whether it's the hospital or whoever else is, maybe CAMS in the area that does that, and having do the assessments. And in terms of coping mechanisms and skills, I mean that stuff can be done without a diagnosis. I mean, obviously, if medication is one of the options that you're looking at, then fine. But also alongside that, one of the books I recommended in the last slide of the webinar, I would definitely recommend for older children, like teenagers. It's called Smart But Scattered. And there is a teen version to that book. You can get it on Amazon. And I would 100% recommend it because it's got tools and strategies and worksheets and things like that help for, I mean, what I mentioned earlier on in the webinar about executive functioning, that's essentially what that 16-year-old needs.
it's what all children need. I mean, adults as well, but that 16-year-old will struggle with what we call executive functioning, which is planning, organization, thinking through problems and problem solving, management of emotions, etc. So those things in the book Smart But Scattered are specifically tailored for that reason. They help with executive functioning skills, and you can help them as a parent to go through some of those things. But essentially what it tries to do is get them to take some responsibility themselves as well, because that's key, is that, how can they take responsibility over getting tasks done, for example, simple tasks like, I want to get up today and clean my bedroom. To us, that might seem like nothing, but for an ADHD kind of brain, that's hard. But Smart But Scattered gives you ways to do that, to take a task like that and to break it down into things that you can then do bit by bit, stage by stage, and get it done. And what happens is I've found, and even with clients I've had who are teenagers with ADHD, when you're able to successfully do something on your own task list or in your own mind that you feel you should be able to do, and you can get it done, it creates a good feeling. Yeah. And that boosts self-esteem. And then that helps you want to go and do more of that. The opposite is also true, because if you don't get things done that you want to get done, you feel like you're a failure, your self-esteem goes lower, you start struggling with that, and then you don't want to engage with things generally day to day. So I would 100% recommend that book, Smart But Scattered, to have a look at it, and see if there's things in there that he can use even from now. And then, like I said, go to your GP and talk to them about assessment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Judah. How do you deal with the negative mindset? My child can develop a very negative mood and nothing I say helps. This could be from not being able to put his socks on easily or dropping something. It's almost like a choice he's made, and talking him through feels more like an argument. I'm rubbish. I'm a terrible person.
Yeah, this is a really difficult one when we see this happen for our children. So you're right. He's internalized what we call a negative script. Yeah. So the script that he's got about himself is what you've just said here. I'm rubbish. I'm a terrible person. So that script, wherever he's got that from, we don't know. Kids internalize these things. We need to challenge that script as often and as kind of explicitly as possible. So, and I'm sure you're doing this already, is you're looking for moments where there are success for him, or anything that looks like success, and you're reinforcing those moments all the time. So any kind of times where he's able to do something which he thought he couldn't do, you give a narrative to that, and you would say, wow, look, you was able to do blah, blah, blah. You didn't think you could do that, but you did it. That kind of narrative for children like this is so important to hear all the time, because it's challenging some of this negative script which you've mentioned, and consistently challenging that over time, not overnight, not 100%, not overnight, but over time, will help to create a new view of self. Yeah, so that can only be done over time, where a new view of self is created. But it is powerful when it comes from those people around us that care for us and love us the most, even though children initially may not react well to what you say. So even when some kids who've got really negative kind of script about themselves, when you praise them or say something good about them at first, they might reject it, or they might even just say to you, oh, shut up, mum, or you just saying that, or whatever it is. They might not be very receptive to it at first. Do not be deterred from that. You keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going, because what you're trying to do is, you're almost, the way I look at it is like a bit of a kind of bank account. You're almost trying to pay off an overdraft of this negative mindset first, before you can get them into the plus, yeah, and into the they've got money in the account. So you've got to keep going, and keep giving this really positive narrative around different things that you see them doing, challenging this negative thing that they've started to establish with themselves. And also the other bit about this is, this might sound like it wouldn't help, but it does, is you also have to become a role model of a positive narrative about self. So self-praise should be heard from you to around that child. The more, the better. And it's not arrogance, it's just you pointing out things that you may have struggled with and have done well with. So you might say, oh, I really thought that I wasn't going to be able to do such and such today, but I got it done. I'm so proud of myself. That kind of narrative for children to hear. They may not answer you, they may not say nothing to you, they may not even react but that is a wonderful thing for them to experience, because when they keep experiencing a parent who does that, or adults around them that do that, that becomes norm. That normalizes it for them. And they think, oh, so number one, you also found things difficult and found that way to get over it. And also you're acknowledging your own good stuff, your own strengths. That's exactly what they need, but it has to be modeled as well. So this is where it has to be a two-pronged approach of you giving it to them, yeah, but you've also got to model it for them to see that this is how I communicate about myself as well. Now that might feel uncomfortable, because I know we as parents don't like to say things like that, but I would, encourage you to challenge yourself, to start even giving yourself a new narrative around your child so that they hear that from you.
Brilliant. Thank you. I love that. I think this is the last one. My teen daughter very often feels overwhelmed when doing any written work. She's then unable to start working. How can I best help her?
Right, yeah, so that's a difficult one, isn't it? Again, you've got to get to the source of what this overwhelm is about. So there's a feeling there, isn't there, about I want to escape from this thing when it comes, and you've got to kind of find a way of helping her express that. So this is the thing about anxieties with anything that children face or teenagers face, is when you don't name the monster becomes bigger and remains big. Okay, so the first thing to do is to name the monster. What is the issue? What is the monster that is stopping you from doing this thing? And if that is something as simple as, I just feel like I get everything wrong, okay, then we have to name that. Because first of all, when we name it, then we know what it is. Then we have to say, okay, so what's going to help us to take this monster on in a bit more kind of manageable way? Yeah. The way to do that is to help your teen daughter think about what would be manageable bit by bit. So for some kids, actually, the issue is I have to do the written work and it's going to take me the next hour. But if I can do 10 minutes and then stop and then do something else that I like for a bit and then come back to it after that, then maybe that's more manageable. It's thinking about it with the teen and doing some problem solving around that. But you've got to name the monster first. You've got to find out, what is it about the written work what is the issue? What is the problem here that she finds is causing the overwhelm? Because once that's known, then you can take it on. And I would suggest you take it on piece by piece, bit by bit, in a manageable way, so that then success is gained, basically. Okay.
As this recording gets sent to our email, I found it very interesting, but I need a bit more time to read through everything. Yes.
Yeah, yes, it does. Yeah.
We will be sending that out yeah, along with these questions. Thank you. Can you repeat the name of the ASD book?
Yeah, so the book is by Tony Atwood. That's the book I mentioned, and it's called Asperger's syndrome, I believe. It's on the slides, so you'll see it on there on the last slide.
Great. Thank you. If a child is both autistic and ADHD, does the autism hyperfocusing dampen the ADHD hyperactivity? Is the hyperactivity part of the sensory seeking nature of autism actually ADHD?
Yeah, so this is where it's very difficult to unpick the two things. If your child is comorbid, then you will see sometimes where that child will present more with their kind of ADHD symptoms, and in other times with the kind of ASC symptoms. The key thing is I think it's difficult to unpick which one's doing what. Is your child managing? And if they're not managing, what can you do to help either side? Whether it is, the hyperfocus that then now needs to be helped because they can't change onto something else, or they change to a new part of their routine, or whether it's the hyperactivity that's taken over and then they can't calm themselves or calm their responses. So whichever part of the conditions are affecting them, try and think about management of what they're dealing with, rather than trying to almost unpick what is what, because that's very difficult when you've got a child who's comorbid. You actually don't know, unless you was inside their brain, you wouldn't actually know what part is doing what at that time, but because they've got both conditions. So try and think about the management side. What do I need to do to help them to cope or manage with this particular thing? If it's causing an issue anyway, what can I do? What can I help them with in this particular way? Yeah.
Thank you. That's brilliant, Judah. Definitely had your expertise tested today, but as always, it's been extremely informative. And I think really, really, really helpful in helping people navigate and how best to support and get the best from the children and the young people, so that they feel like they're really thriving.
All good. Well, hopefully it's helpful to people. Yeah, and yeah, please feel free to pass on my details to anybody who needs to contact me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Judah.
All right.